and a relational approach with an attitude of openness. Mark Coeckelbergh, professor, doctor, philosopher of technology, researcher on artificial intelligence and robotics, machines like others, on the moral status of robots.
Okay, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here, for giving me the opportunity to be at this Congress. And here in Colombia, it's the first time that I'm here in Colombia and Medellin, so it's very exciting for me. And I feel since the morning very good vibe here at this conference, very inspirational speakers, very interesting talks. What I will do today is talk about robots. So let me see if this works. Yeah. So basically, I'm a philosopher. I'm a philosopher of technology. And I think about robots for two reasons. One reason is that we need to think about new technologies because they have all kinds of opportunities, but also risks and problems. They have an impact, ethically speaking, and impact on our society also. So we need to do something there. But there's also a second reason why I think about robots, and that is to better understand the human. So I think robots can be a mirror to better understand ourselves. And this is also, for me, as a philosopher, a very important motivation for doing this kind of work. So today I will speak about the moral status of robots. And as I said, I'm a philosopher, but I'm specialized in thinking about new technologies and what the impact of new technologies is on the good life of the human being and on the society. And I find it very important to not only stay in academia, but engage with other disciplines, but also go outside the university, talk to people everywhere, also go to policymakers. Before I studied philosophy, I studied political science. I'm very interested in engaging with societal issues also, both national issues and global issues. So this is definitely still my interest. Also to talk, when we think about new technologies, to talk with the technical people that actually develop the technologies, rather than only looking at the users. And then I'm interested to, the last years I do a lot of talking and even collaboration with artists. Like 2 weeks ago I was working with artists on a project of dancing with robots. So for me, art can also bring a unique perspective to understand the relations between human and technologies and to understand what might happen also in the future when new technologies are developed and enter our society. My approach is coming from various points. I will not stress here so much the theoretical background, but I will start with a phenomenon that is a bit curious and that therefore can generate our reflection, can inspire also to think about humans. And that is that we tend to, when robots are in humanoid form and form of the human, or when they are looking like an animal, we tend to empathize with them. And so that means, for example, that if someone kicks a robot, this is a robot dog called Spot, was developed by a firm called Boston Dynamics. And the designers, they kicked the robot to test if the robot can stand up well. So if you kick it, is the robot able to stabilize itself? So it was a technical test. But then on the internet, people reacted like, poor Spot, why are you doing this to the robot? Why are you hitting the robot? So this is for me interesting. Why is it that people empathize with a machine? Shouldn't people only empathize with human beings or with animals maybe? And how can we explain that this happens? Here another example from the same company where a robot is pushed, again to see if it is stable, if it's intelligent enough to stabilize itself. But people don't like this kind of violence against robots generally. So how can we understand that, and is it a good thing? Let's first go to psychology. So psychology empirically confirms that yes, we empathize with robots. So here there's a comparison between a robot hand that's threatened to be cut and a human hand. And although people empathize less with the robot, they still empathize. So they still feel something that something bad can happen when they see only the robot hand and not the human hand. So there is evidence that in our brain this empathy happen. We are very empathetic beings, and we even empathize with machines. Here other experiments like where bad things are done with robots, and people empathize with the robots, even if they look not human. For example, these Hexbug robots, they don't look human, but people, they hesitated to smash them if they're first told a story about these robots. So empathy in humans is luckily very strong. So that's good news, but we still want to understand why this happens, that even machines get our empathy. So for example, a toaster, we don't empathize with a toaster, but we empathize with these particular robots. So why is that? Also here, this is a robot Paro, which is given to people in elderly people in a home, and they're given the robot, and for example here, person hugs the robot, and is very happy to see the robot. Again, this is kind of strange because it's not really an animal. Yeah, it's an imaginary. It's a robot with an imaginary form that's based on a seal. But it's a robot. It's a machine. So it's very difficult to account for this. Then I went to philosophy, and philosophy has all kind of theories about ethics, about how we should treat other humans and how we should treat non-humans. So normally you say in ethics, one theory says like, yeah, there should be a moral rule. For example, a moral rule against hurting human beings. But there is no such rule against kicking robots, for example. Yeah, so there are human rights, but there are no robot rights. And there's no rule there. So we cannot really use that if we want to argue that it's not good to kick the robots. And we can also not argue that it's wrong to kick the robot because the robot feels pain. The robot doesn't feel any pain. Human beings can feel, animals can feel, robots don't feel pain. So also this kind of theory does not work to explain or to evaluate. Now, what Immanuel Kant, a philosopher, did was to argue about animals that it's not good to treat them cruel, not because the animal itself, but because if a human being who treats a dog badly, for example, will also get hard in his feelings towards other human beings. So in the time of Kant, now we would say like it's actually bad to treat the dog like this because of the dog itself, because the dog can feel pain. But here it's an indirect argument. It's saying like, no, it's not about the dog, but it's about the humans that will become inhumane. So this is an interesting argument because that could work for the robot. So even if the robot doesn't feel pain and we don't care about the robot, we can say that it's not good if we kick the robot because we will become harder in our feelings, we will become not empathetic towards human beings. So that argument can be used. And that's also in virtue ethics, you can say that this robot doesn't feel pain, but the character of the human being is damaged when that human being does violence. I would even say that even if you not only do a violent action towards a robot, but also if you do vandalism, if you are not careful with things, if you do aggressive, violent moves to things, that then you could use the same argument. It's not good for your character. Yeah. So according to virtue ethics, to get a good character, you should always get in a good habit. Yeah. To be good to other people, to be good to nature, to be good to your environment. And if you always do this, if you make this habit, then you become a better person. So that's I think a very good moral theory, and we can use that theory also to say like, yeah, so therefore it's not good that we are aggressive against machines. The only problem there is that you don't really care about the other. So if you say that about humans, for example, then a philosopher like Levinas would say that the other is very important. It's not only about your own character, but it's also about the other. But then can a robot be another? So I think it's very, very doubtful that a robot can be really that kind of other. What the robot can be, though, is this mirror to understand ourselves. Like now the robot, through thinking about the robot teaches us about how humans are and how we think about moral status. And it makes us think about what is a good way of living. How can we make sure that people feel empathy? Then there are also artists who think about machines and doing bad things to machines. Like here, it's a motor and first a grinding wheel here in this example, where the grinding wheel is left hanging on the wall, and it looks like the machine is in distress, has pain. And so again, people tend to empathize even with this kind of machine. Also here an engine that's made to go very fast until it breaks. So until there's basically it overheats and so on. So people even empathize with this kind of machines. So it doesn't even have to be a robot. Right? It can be all kind of machines. So again, this makes us think about humans, I think, about our great capacity we have for empathy and for extending our empathy beyond the human. We can empathize with animals, and we are even able to empathize with non-living things. So this is pretty strong, I think, and I think it's an optimistic message, even if the art is a bit can come across as a bit strange. Here also machines that are in tension physically, where people also think that it's not good to do that, or that there is a problem. So then I go further to philosophy, because I think that the general ethical theories don't say enough about how this empathy works and what we should do towards other beings, because the reason why we have so much empathy is because we are relational beings. So often modern moral theories, they look only at individual without the relations to others. And I think on this conference it's very important to stress that we are relational beings, and so we can relate to others, we do relate to others, and that's human others, but it can also be non-human others. So in my book, Growing Moral Relations, I said more about that. And I also was very critical about a certain attitude that the philosopher has, and generally modern thinking has, towards moral status. Because what's actually happening is that we look at the properties and then we say, like, yeah, because the machine doesn't have consciousness, it cannot feel pain, for example. But there are a few problems with this way of reasoning. Because if we reason like this, then it's not sure how can we be absolutely sure that this other being doesn't feel pain, for example. And maybe with robots you're quite convinced that the robot doesn't feel pain. But take an animal like a fish, for example. There we are not sure always if the animal feels pain or doesn't feel pain. Yeah? So it's difficult with this kind of approach. How can we really be sure that if we just think about this kind of arguments that it works in the case of for example, animals? And there's also something wrong with the procedure because it looks like we, as modern people, we put ourselves at the top of the hierarchy, and we say that the other entities that we are going to decide about their moral status. So instead of opening up to the other, we already categorize the non-human being before that we have the moral status. So we kind of put the being on a dissection table, so to speak, look at the properties, and I think that is a very distant approach. So often there's a lot of good things about theory. Theory can generalize, can help us, but theory can also distance us from reality, distance from others. So in the case of humans, for example, if I reason about you, if you are a conscious being or not, then I take distance from you, yeah, instead of engaging with you. And that is what we do in normal life. We engage with one another, and so the moral status emerges from this interaction and this social relation that we have with one another. So if we don't do that and we do it in a very theoretical way, there is also a problem. And so that can also happen with a robot when we say it's just a machine. Yes, it's true, it is just a machine, but by putting ourselves at a safe distance, we're missing in our morality the encounter with the other. We're missing the possibility that another being, I would normally say another living being, that there is more going on there, and that we cannot just say that this being has no moral status. So we put on ourselves as a kind of God's eye point of view. So we act as gods, but gods here meant not in the sense of the Indian philosophy that we heard before, but more as a kind of arrogant boss of the creation. And so this is a problem, I think, when we take this attitude. So what is the alternative? I propose a more social relational approach where we see the human being in relation with other human beings, but also in relation with nature. And from this perspective, we can be critical of how, in practice, all kind of moral status is ascribed, because what actually happens, for example, in the case of the robot dog, by giving the name Spot, we create we construct this robot as if it was a person or as if it was a dog. And so language plays an important role also in how we relate to others. And that's why we should also be very careful about the language that we use. Because the language we use towards other human beings or towards also non-humans can harm, can do violence to this other human being or other non-human entity. So the words are very important that we use. It's not only what we do, but also what we say. And so I was inspired there by Wittgenstein, and of course also by language in the sense of narratives. So when people empathize with robots, it's also because we are told all kind of narratives about robots, either as competitors that we have to fight with, or as lovers. And I think both are very problematic. Competition is problematic because it puts all kind of relations in this competitive mode, so we should move beyond that. And romantic love with machines is also problematic because it misleads us thinking that technology is going to solve our problems we have in modern society with relationships between humans. So one example of a narrative here where people again empathize was with a robot that was hitchhiking, and at some point it was going through different countries, and it ended up in the US and was then vandalized. Some people would say killed, right, because they empathized with it. So, and there was a whole story about this robot. Again, a kind of projection that people make because they empathize. So stories are important, language is important. So we have to think about technology. What kind of stories do we want to tell about the technology, and what kind of stories do we want to tell about ourselves as human beings in relation to others, human and non-human? So yeah, I think more generally, we need to think about how the machines, how they impact our lives. For example, technology has an important impact on our time, often speeds up time, organizes our time. Think about a mobile phone, and robots also will change the rhythm of our lives. So we need to think, if we care about the good life, as the ancients thought, ancient Greeks, but also other cultures, thinking about what is a good life for the human being, where we need to think about how technology influences that good life. Can technology give us eudaimonia? Can it give us a good life, or can it also be a threat to that? Can it be problematic? This kind of questions we need to ask more, I think. And when we will have more and more technologies that pretend to enter the social world and that present themselves as our friend, as our companion, as our pet, and so on, then we need to think about, do we want that? Do we want to tell that kind of stories? Or should we focus on stories between human beings or between living beings? These questions, since we have artificial intelligence that's developing, we have smarter robots, these questions will come up more often. So we need to think about what kind of social world we want to create. And for humans, Emmanuel Levinas, he talked about the other. He talked about alterity, the face of the other. Levinas talked about human beings, thought that only human beings have a face, and invite us to ethically respond to them. Now, we have to question today, I think, given what we know about animals, we have to also ask if animals can have face, or some animals can have face, can invite us to also respond ethically. I think from a relational point of view, that's very important. And then, of course, one can use also, again, the robot as a mirror to try to think about how far do we want our moral status ascription and our empathy to reach. Do we also want to give it to technology or not? And what happens in practice when people use a certain language that makes technology into persons, or it seems to make them into persons, about if that is what we want, or if we should focus more on other kind of relations. Also, the philosopher, French philosopher Derrida, he also makes us think about similar things by saying that, yeah, if we use the word animal, already this word animal sets it apart from humans. And I think that is very problematic, because we are also at the same time animals and humans, and so we should not create divides between us or walls between us and the rest of nature. At the same time, of course, I think we can recognize that there are differences, but we should not make this very deep gap, I think. Also, he invited us to think about hospitality. Like, what does it mean to be hospitable? And this is, again, makes me think about this relational question. Like, we probably should be, as relational beings, should be open to other beings. How open should we be? How far should we go there? Should we? Is there indeed a oneness in the world? And how is that? We need to think more about that. There are more sources of inspiration. I will not go into that, but I would like to stress that instead of the more theoretical and scientific methods only, it's good that we have science, it's good that we have philosophy, but instead of only having that, we also need more engaged modes of interacting, relating to others and including non-human others. And for that, we need to resist the desire that we have in the theory to always immediately categorize other beings, whether it's humans or whether it's animals or any entity. We tend to have this tendency to always put up borders immediately, and especially by this very exercise, borders between me, the philosopher, and the rest of the world. And I think we should try to overcome these borders and have more attention to the concrete encounter, to the event of the encounter with the other, and in that way find a different kind of ethical relationship. And art can help us also to destabilize a bit the categories that we always make, and to think about, like, shouldn't we rather, instead of these borders, build bridges towards others? So in terms of virtue, then, I think we need an attitude there of openness and also of patience, because the philosopher or the scientist who immediately categorizes others does violence to these others and is also impatient, because it's not open to the encounter itself, to the experience. I think when it comes to knowledge in general, and so knowledge in general, but also then especially the ethical knowledge, knowledge should be based on experience and should not only be based on abstract formalization, abstract concepts. Concepts can hurt people, so we need to make sure that we have a more patient kind of epistemology. And I think artists can help us to open up, to question the very fixed distinctions that are there in our thinking, and especially in modern Western thinking. So I think the implication then is that we should be open to possibilities that there are also non-human others. We should experiment to some extent also in that, to get new experiences. And I think we should really be critical about empathy with machines, not by saying it's just a machine. It's true, it's just a machine, but by also letting the robot also make us question not just the technology, but make us question the very way we think about ethics and the way we relate to other non-humans. So for robotics and more technology in general, I think we need to think more about this meaning of technology and how the technology changes things also in society. And for artists, it means that we can let them help us also to think about new possibilities of relating to technology, And we have to see what is the best for us, what is the best for humans. Is it good to empathize with machines, or do we want to tell different stories? And in the end, the question is, what kind of stories do we want to tell about ourselves, about the human being, about personally ourselves, and what story do we want to tell about our society? And starting from there, we can then go back to technology and see what role can technology play in that, rather than letting technology take over, in the sense that technology nowadays more and more tells us what to do and how we lead our lives. And we should decide ourselves as individuals and as societies what is the good life, and then have technology play a constructive role in that. So art can help us to with this task, and can also help us to open up to the unpredictable. I think one of the beautiful things of life is that there is surprises. Even if we first categorize, even if we first have a fixed story, the story can change, and we can experience new things, bad things, but also beautiful things, good things. So we can also ethically, I think, be open for surprises there, for encounters with other human beings, but also with non-human beings. So for society, then we need also to think about that level, because it's not just, I think, about our personal ethics and how we as individuals want to lead our lives, but also about this wider question, how to organize collectives, and what role of technology is in there. And for that purpose, to think about technology in this way, and also to rethink our relations to other beings, it's very important in education also that there is place for this. That in education that we think about technology, but that also that it's not just a top-down kind of thing, that philosophers tell other people how things are, or that politicians decide for other people and for the whole of society. I think it's important that citizens and users of technology participate in making together this future of technology. So we need these more dialogical models and different approaches, and like this we can find out how we already relate to other entities, and how is the best way to relate to other human beings and to non-human entities. So this means that we should educate people also to be aware of the language that we use, be aware of what kind of relations we are creating through our lives, and through the way we actually relate to others. So it matters what you do, it matters a lot, because the society will transform in the way that you relate to others, to other humans and to non-humans. And so, I think it's nice that both in science and in art we can think about mysteries of human capacities like empathy, what empathy means. I think that's important for the future of technology, for deciding what kind of technology we want, but also for the future of the human. What we want to do with this wonderful capacity of empathy. Thank you.